Hello, my name is YS and welcome to my N.E.W.T.s Readathon wrap-up. So this video is going to be a combination of a paint with me and a reading wrap-up for the month of August where I did the N.E.W.T.s Magical Readathon. If you want to see the painting time-lapse without hearing me talk about books, I'll leave a link in the description to a video with just the painting process. So the N.E.W.T.s Magical Readathon, if you don't know, is a readathon in the month of August based on the N.E.W.T.s exams in Harry Potter, where there are 3 challenges assigned to each subject, and there's this whole career guide of different careers you can have in the wizarding world, and which N.E.W.T.s you need to get these careers. So you probably already know this if you're watching this video, but it's a super fun month-long readathon, and I was so hyped. And of course, it's created by the lovely BookRoast, who did so much work, and I love watching all of her vlogs throughout this, which is why I thought it was appropriate to paint her portrait for my reading wrap-up. So I won't talk too much about the painting process itself in this video. I used the Winsor & Newton designer gouache for this portrait, and I don't know, for some reason I wanted to experiment with more pastel, like soft, almost like a pearl type skin, which is really different from some of my previous portraits. But I don't know, I just wanted to experiment. I don't think it was like super successful because I didn't really know how to deal with the pastels while keeping a huge range of values. I don't know. Anyways, on to the important part, the books. So the career I went for N.E.W.T.s was Hogwarts professor, and the subject I wanted to teach was arithmancy, because in real life my goal is to be a math teacher, so I thought this was really fitting. So for this I had to get an O in arithmancy, an E in defense against the dark arts, and 2 other acceptables. So I'm going to start off with arithmancy. For A in arithmancy, you need to read a book with even numbered pages, and for that I read Tell Me How You Really Feel by Amina May Safi, which was 312 pages. And I believe I gave this a 3 stars. It's a female-female romance between 2 high school students. One is that like film club nerdy girl, and the other is a super popular cheerleader. And at the beginning of the book, they hate each other and eventually they fall in love. And they're both like women of color, and hate to love is one of my favorite tropes. So I was really expecting to dig this. Unfortunately, it was only okay. Like, it was cute, but it didn't wow me in any way. And there weren't that many moments where I felt my heart beating super fast, waiting for, what happens next. So this book I only gave a 3 stars. For E in arithmancy, you have to read a standalone, so I read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This book was totally different from what I thought it would be. Like, I always assumed Wuthering Heights was similar to like Pride and Prejudice, which was just a romance with some drama, but it was so different. There was like so much drama, but it wasn't exactly romantic. Like, it was romantic, but it was more about the family, I guess, dynamics between Heathcliff and basically everyone else. And it was so good. It was like Victorian Kardashians. And the writing added to it, you get a lot of perspectives. I will say the first few chapters are really confusing because there are a lot of characters. Some of them have the same name, and some of them have a mixed match of different names, and there's like time skipping. Actually, the past 2 years, every summer I tried to read this book, but after the first 2 chapters, I just gave up because I didn't feel like figuring out what was going on. This time, the first 4 chapters, right after I read them, I read the Cliff's Notes, and once I more got the feel of what was going on, I could read it on my own and really enjoy it. So in the end, I gave this a 4 stars. For O in arithmancy, you have to read a book over 350 pages. Unfortunately, I did not do that. Okay, so little disclaimer here, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And audiobooks I mostly listen to when I'm on my commute, walking somewhere, or at the gym. So I went to the gym and walked around a lot in August and ended up listening to a lot of audiobooks. So for the O in arithmancy, the audiobook I listened to was The Source of Self-Regard by Toni Morrison. And the challenge was a book over 350 pages. This was 354 pages. Unfortunately, Toni Morrison passed earlier last month. She was such an amazing writer. I've only read 2 of her other books, Sula and the Bluest Eye, but her writing is so visceral and intense and beautiful at the same time. So this is an essay collection. I believe it's taken from different essays she's written throughout the past, so a lot of them don't have very much to do with each other. It's not super cohesive, but her writing is absolutely beautiful, so intelligent. I gave this a 4 stars. But I do want to reread this later as an actual book because I feel like as the audiobook, I couldn't understand the dense amount of information as well as I could have if I read it and took a pen or highlighters or whatever and really dug into it. So definitely want to reread that at some point. Next, for Defense Against the Dark Arts, for acceptable, the challenge was a book that was black under the dust jacket. I only had 2 hardcover books And luckily, one of them was black under the dust jacket. So that was Man in Black by Johnny Cash. In a lot of his music, there are strong biblical themes, and this book, Man in Black, is basically his retelling of Apostle Paul's story. I really liked Johnny Cash's music back in high school, so I had high hopes for this, but honestly, I didn't love it that much. I think I really liked his music because it's so sparse, but so effective. And in this novel, I could kind of tell he was trying to write a novel, if that makes sense at all. I don't know, I just didn't love it. And maybe I would have enjoyed it more if I had known more about Apostle Paul's story. Overall, I only gave it a 2.5 stars. I picked it up for $1 at a thrift store, so I think I'm just going to donate it back. Moving on to E in Defense Against the Dark Arts, Gilderoy's Memory Charm. Read the first book you remember. So when I was reading these challenges, the first book that popped into my head was The Princess Bride by William Goldman, the novel that the film was based on. I loved this movie, and I loved this book when I read it in high school, so I reread it. It was very fun. Total 5 stars. If you love the movie, definitely read it. It's fantastic. The first 40 pages are really weird, but just get through it. If you haven't watched the movie, you might not like this. That's just an opinion I've heard from some friends. And for O in Defense Against the Dark Arts, Cornish Pixie, read an English author or setting. So for this, I listened to the audiobook of 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. To be honest, when I borrowed this audiobook from the library, I thought I was borrowing that book that everyone's talking about, I think 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which the title is so similar. And I knew that book was about some old Hollywood starlet and her 7 husbands or something. So when I started listening to this, I was so confused. But this book is really cool. It's basically like a super weird, intense game of Clue. If Clue and Black Mirror kind of had a baby. I was pretty confused at some points, but definitely hella atmospheric, a really fun adventure. Basically Clue meets Black Mirror. And this book I gave a 4 stars. Okay, moving on to Care of Magical Creatures. For A, Follow the Spiders, read a book that starts with A for Aragog. The audiobook I read for this was The Art of Quiet Influence. So it starts with the, but I'm gonna ignore the and say A is the first letter. This is by Jocelyn Davis, and this is basically one of those business-focused self-help books about how you can be a better leader, but using quiet influence. And she brings up a lot of stories and examples from Asian cultures. It was okay, nothing really stuck in my mind to be honest, so I gave it a 3 stars. It also doesn't really apply to my life right now because I'm not in any type of leadership position like that. It was okay. And for E of Care of Magical Creatures, the challenge was to read a book less than 300 pages. So for this, I listened to the audiobook of Everything is Fucked by Mark Manson. This is the same guy who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which was really popular a few years ago. I, again, really like this book. So the theme of this book is about hope and how to find hope when you're feeling a little not hopeful. And I especially liked the beginning of the book where he was talking about the difference between your feeling brain and your thinking brain. So your more emotional side and your more logical side and how you can balance those and control those. And in general, like his previous book, this book had a lot of great examples, great stories, and was pretty entertaining to listen to. I gave this book a 4 stars. So moving on to charms, A, read a book with a gorgeous cover. For this, I listened to the audiobook of The Library Book by Susan Orlean. I honestly didn't know what this book was going to be about. I thought it was a novel, but it was actually a non-fiction book about libraries. Especially, I think, the Central Library in LA, I think. And basically how they've changed, and it really focuses on the present state of libraries. And this one library that burnt down and what happened there. So there's a tiny element of true crime in it, I guess. In general, it was okay. It was kind of entertaining. I liked knowing more about current library services and how it's changed. So I gave this a 3 stars. For Ian Charms, read a comic, graphic novel, or a book less than 150 pages. So for this, I read Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, which is a graphic novel by Moriko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. Honestly, I gave it a 4 stars. Here's why. I thought the drawing style was really cute. It was 4-star drawing, but the story was more 3 stars. This graphic novel follows a very normal, relatable girl, and she's dating a really cool girl named Laura Dean. However, Laura Dean is not very nice to her. She keeps breaking up with her, keeps cheating on her with other girls, And it's kind of teen love story of you really like someone and they're really cool, but maybe it's not gonna work out. I don't know, maybe I don't relate to like the high school romance as much anymore, but the story was only like okay. The art was adorable, beautiful, very like puts you in the mood of this book. So moving on to herbology, for A, the challenge was Mandrake. Listen to an audiobook or a book with a green cover. So because I love audiobooks, I listened to Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. This is a sci-fi book which is really cool. Basically, there's these giant like robot parts they find all over the world, and these scientists have to basically figure out what to do with that. I don't even know how to describe it without giving more spoilers, but it's really good. The author also wrote for Black Mirror, so this gives you kind of a sense of the direction it'll go. If you liked An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, I thought that this was basically that, except without the social media and like darker and for adults. The audiobook is amazing because it's a full cast, so all of the voice actors for each different character is amazing, especially because I think the book is completely told in interview format or like voice recording format. The audiobook really suits it. However, because there are so many different characters and perspectives throughout this book, I didn't remember like any of their names, and I could only really differentiate them by their voices and their accents. So that was definitely confusing. If you can, I'd say listen to the audiobook while reading the book. I think that is definitely the best approach. This author wrote an amazing novella called The Test, so definitely check that out. I gave Sleeping Giants 4 stars, but The Test was like 5 stars for sure. It was mind-blowing. Okay, so for E for herbology, the challenge was to read a book between 350 and 390 pages. For this challenge, I listened to the audiobook Because the Internet by Gretchen McCulloch. This book was basically about how language has evolved because of the internet, and I found it like pretty interesting actually. So I gave this just a 3 stars. Maybe I feel it's more of a 3.5. Okay, next, Muggle Studies. I actually got all 3 N.E.W.T.s for Muggle Studies. I don't know why. So for A in Muggle Studies, the challenge was to read a book with a photo on the cover, and for this I used the audiobook of Fear, Trump in the White House by Brandon Woodward. Just another book about Trump. Yeah, it was interesting. A little bit surprising how much corruption is going on, but also like, I don't know what to say. I also listened to the Mueller report last month, so just a lot of Trump. This book I gave a 3 stars. For E in Muggle Studies, read a book set in the real world. So for this I used the audiobook of Lie With Me by Philip Benson. This is a male-male romance, autobiographical, but like it's about like this guy who's an author and about a romance in his teens and then he grows up. It's very short, it's only 140 pages. In tone it feels kind of similar to Call Me By Your Name, but I wasn't attached to the characters in the same way, maybe just because it was shorter. For this I gave it a 3.5 stars, just because the writing was actually pretty well done. Would have been nice to have like an actual physical reading experience of this rather than listening to it. And for O in Muggle Studies, a person of color author. For this I listened to With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Aquedo, I think? I don't know, I tried. This is a book about a girl in high school. She's a teen mom, she's Black and Latina, and she is an amazing cook, and basically about how she has to fight for herself and struggle. But this book isn't at all like super preachy or judgmental or has a lot of like evil people trying to push her down. This book just overwhelms you with a feeling of niceness and cuteness, and there is like some romance element to it, and obviously like the cover is gorgeous, and I gave this 4 stars. And finally, Transfiguration. For A, read a book with LGBTQA representation. For this I used the audiobook Less by Andrew Shear Greer, which is about a middle-aged gay man and how his life is kind of like sad and meh. And he basically does like that year of yes thing where he says yes to every project and tries to travel the world and find himself or something. It was okay, there were some fun moments, but nothing really sparked for me in this book, so I gave it a 3 stars. For E in Transfiguration, the challenge was to read not the first book in a series, so any book in a series other than the first one. And for this I listened to the audiobook of Shadow of Self by Brandon Sanderson. And this is the 5th book in Mistborn / the 2nd book in the second part of Mistborn? I don't know, it's confusing. It was okay. Like, Mistborn, the original trilogy, was amazing, mind-blowing. The second trilogy, I guess, of that is only okay. and this is the second book of that second trilogy. So I listened to it because I want to keep going on with Mistborn, but yeah, so I gave it 3 stars. And for O in Transfiguration, McGonagall does not mess around, a book more than 500 pages. And for this, I listened to Middle Game by Shauna Maguire. Everyone's been talking about this book lately. It's like sci-fi meets fantasy. At first, I was really hesitant to pick up this book because it seemed like it was about kids, but actually it follows these kids as they grow up. So basically, it's about these twins, Roger and Dodger, but they've both been adopted by different families and they don't know about each other. And it starts out in the real world, and as the book goes on, they develop supernatural abilities. There's a lot of time skips. I got a lot more emotionally invested in these characters than I thought I would. I didn't love the adventure and like the conflict at the end of this book quite as much because I just really liked the relationship between Roger and Dodger. And because it does follow them as they grow up, it's not just about kids. So basically, if you want a really fun but somewhat dark supernatural / sci-fi adventure, definitely check this out. And those are the books I read for N.E.W.T.s. Before I started these N.E.W.T.s books, I also finished reading Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, which is why I didn't read that many physical books because the first week and a half of this month, I was just reading like the last few hundred pages of Words of Radiance. Obviously 5 stars, loved it, it was amazing. But in total, I completed 18 books for N.E.W.T.s, though only 4 of them were actual books, and 13 of them were audiobooks, and 1 was a graphic novel. And of the books I actually read, only 2 of them came from my physical TBR. And in total, I got 7 acceptables, 7 excellents, and 4 outstandings in my subjects. The subjects I got outstandings in were arithmancy, DADA, Muggle Studies, and Transfiguration. So you know what? Not bad. Pretty successful if I do say so myself. This readathon was super duper fun, and all my thanks and appreciation to BookRoast for hosting and creating this super awesome readathon. And I actually didn't know about the Owls when they were actually happening this year, so I did an Owls catch-up in July. And if you want to see kind of a wrap-up of that / the books I read in July, check out that video because it's also a paint with me, but it's very different from painting a portrait. I hope you like this kind of mashup of 2 genres of YouTube videos. I really like doing this, so please let me know if you like this because I would really love to continue. But that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Comment below if you did the N.E.W.T.s this year, or if you read any of these books. I'd love to hear your opinions, and subscribe if you want to see more content, and more importantly, add me on Goodreads, because you know, I love having more bookish friends. Okay, that's it. Bye.